trying to define human success or failure is like trying to determine exactly where a fog begins. It can't be done, but that does not mean that the fog doesn't exist. A person is not a failure in life because he or she is not in the top decile for mathematics or any other skill or ability. This is not only because duffers at school often turn out to be splendid in the rest of life, or because people who are brilliant at school often turn out to be duffers in the rest of life. It is because there is no single criterion by which success or failure can be measured, or even a small number of criteria. Though our corrupt and disgraceful educational establishment persists in believing that if a centralized bureaucracy imposes enough tests and enough measures, it will raise educational standards rather than provoke organized lying. Same goes for the health service, incidentally. The fear or avoidance of failure prevents success. A certain proportion of pupils, if one's still allowed to use the term pupil, because I've noticed that children now achieve the status of student at the age of 3, usually a very high proportion of pupils must pass a test according to an arbitrarily set target, or else the teacher, him or herself, who is judged by these results, is deemed to have failed. And this means that the teacher's energies will be devoted to producing mediocrity or even sub-mediocrity, a mediocrity or sub-mediocrity that is counted a success since almost everyone can attain it. The setting of publicized targets creates a pressure to meet them. And as anyone who has worked in such a bureaucracy knows, the easiest way to meet them is to lower the standards required to meet them. Grade inflation is the consequence of the fear of failure, and it corrupts and undermines the value of success, even as narrowly conceived, because soon enough everyone comes to know that the currency has been debased, that, if you like, the coin has been clipped. The proper way to address failure is with tact and generosity of spirit. These can't really be taught, I think, and certainly they can't be measured. A teacher, it seems to me, needs to keep in, and here I'm open to correction from a former teacher, needs to keep in mind many things at once, which of course the bureaucracy does not allow him to do. That a child ought to know that it is failing without being humiliated by that knowledge. That a child ought to know why he's failing, whether it is because he is not putting enough work into the effort into his work, or because he is unsuited by nature to that work, or some other factor. The teacher must encourage the pupil to do better without demanding the impossible of him. The teacher needs to be modest enough to understand that a child's failure in what he teaches might conceivably be his fault, for example, in failing to make what he is teaching interesting to the child. He may fail to promote the child's interest. But he must not expect the same level of response and interest from every pupil, because pupils are different. And that failure, in any case, in his own particular subject, is not the final blasting of a child's hopes in life. It's not catastrophic. While at the same time, he, the teacher, must retain faith in the importance or value of what he has to teach. He must desire the success of his pupils, but not fear their failure. Well, not long ago, I was in a public debate with a person much more famous than I on the subject of what it takes to be good. And I won't name her because I don't want to besmirch anyone's name, though I didn't think she was good, actually. But she said that a necessary condition of being good was to be intelligent, by which, I think, she meant to be in the top 1% at most of the distribution of human intelligence. In other words, goodness is possible, though she didn't say it was guaranteed, only for the intellectual elite. Now, this seemed to me a terrible doctrine in its implications, as well as being empirically preposterous. It condemned the vast majority of humanity to incapability where goodness was concerned. It seems to me that we are rather inclined to make similar mistakes in the relation between educational success and success in life. Educational success being measured merely by a few numbers. Now, I'm far from decrying intelligence or scholastic success, however it may be measured. Indeed, I'm appalled by the obviously low general level of education in this country, which you can see just by walking in the street, and which is evident to me when I arrive in this country from a stint abroad, almost anywhere in the world. But there seems to me almost an ideological or determined quality to the evident low cultural and educational level in this country, a kind of deliberate crudity, vulgarity, and stupidity, a lack of refinement of any kind, an inability or unwillingness to learn even so simple a matter as how to address strangers with reasonable civility. All the more devastating, of course, in an economy that is highly dependent on the provision of services. That is why, whatever our level of unemployment, we will continue to have to import labor from abroad if we want to have simple services that work with tolerable efficiency and grace. And if you don't believe me, I suggest you go to a large hotel with only a British staff. It's amusing in a way. In part, this situation has arisen because of fear of failure, a fear of wounding our children's supposedly fragile self-esteem by correcting them, by giving them the impression that they did not come into the world perfect, and that they are not authorities from a very early age, authorities on what is best for them and best for everyone else. Any form of correction comes to be viewed as a permanently damaging assault on their psyche. When I ask young men serving in shops or elsewhere in this country not to address me as mate, and which they do a large number of times, I don't know whether anyone else has had this experience in England, they are deeply offended by not so much by what I'm saying, but by the very idea of being corrected. Teachers who have the temerity to correct children or who criticize their conduct to parents often face abuse, and in this country even violence, from parents, because their criticism implies defects in the children, and possibly in the parents as well, and the need for improvement, a sensitivity which has its origin in the fear of failure. Now, of course, constant and carping criticism or deliberate and repeated humiliation can undermine the self-confidence of children. This is perfect common sense. And no doubt it can turn them into neurotic wrecks if carried far enough. That is why children should be taught early to tolerate exposure of failure, conducted by people who obviously have their welfare at heart, as I think teachers should have. Learning to face failure and failings is one of the most important lessons in life, and no inflation of self-esteem is a substitute for it. And insofar as our governments of whatever stripe peddle populist slogans such as "No child left behind," They help to bring about failure of the worst kind, that is to say, unacknowledged failure, and on a very large scale. For the easiest, surest, and most efficient way to ensure that no child is left behind is to make sure that no child gets ahead. The price of success is failure. Thank you.